Welcome to Coffee Spills and Pineapples. This is Rafi, your host, and today I'm joined by a really good, I can call him a friend, Thomas Coombes, who comes to us from all the way from Berlin. You can see us set up in the Generation N space, where we're soon going to have a conference. But we are going to have a sneak peek and talk with Thomas about hope-based communications. Hi, Thomas. Thank you for coming. Thank you for accepting to be my guest on this podcast. Hope-based communications is something that I discovered a few years ago, and I became a huge fan. Started incorporating it in my own work, in driving my journey of hope-based communications through the work that I do and the storytelling that I tell. So how did you come to this method? Where did it all start? Let's start with that, and then we take it deeper later.
Hi, Rafi. Thanks for having me on the show. It's really exciting. I love the name, and in a way, hope-based communication actually comes from one big coffee spill. So I was working at Amnesty International doing communications about human rights and communication, trying to raise people's awareness about all the things going wrong in the world, like all the worst things. And my approach is like, people need to know all these horrible things that are happening. And it was particularly around 2016, quite a bad year in a human rights point of view. Obviously, there were a lot of elections where people voted for people who didn't seem very kind, let's put it that way. But also just in terms of refugees, there's a really big issue of people fleeing war and persecution and just other people not being ready to welcome them. And so what we would do at Amnesty International, and my personal way of communicating, like, this is terrible, things are going really bad. I would even use language like, we're going back to the 1930s, because those were my fears. And then I started learning from other experts, reading about neuroscience, but particularly there were communications experts from the United States, like Anachenko Osorio, or these people, Robert Perez and Amy Simon, who have this approach called Hardwired. And they basically were showing me that when we create fear in our audiences, they're actually less likely to have compassion for other people. They're less likely to welcome people who are different, and they're more likely to support a sort of strong men politicians. And so I realized, all my communication is about fear, but I'm actually not creating the emotion.
So you're giving into the fear craze in your communications.
Yeah, and so that's what my communication, if I actually wanted people to have compassion for other human beings, all my communication about fear was actually one big coffee spill. And so it's from there I started asking myself, well, okay, what's the emotion I want people to feel? Which is compassion, empathy, open-mindedness, also just being open to changing your mind and wanting to take action. All of those things actually require us to feel hopeful. Like, we're not going to take action unless we think it's possible to make change happen.
Yeah. You spoke about migration and the crisis of 2016 in terms of people coming to power, and we see that trend, I want to say, expand. I don't think it's something that would probably come to our lives in a year and disappear. It's something that is going to be long-lived, short-lived, but there's going to be a lifespan. And where are we with it? Is it going to get worse before it gets better? Is it something that we would be, when we talk about the fears, when we talk about migration again, these are the big sort of hashtags that people are using to drive their narratives forward. So where are we with the hope narratives? Where are we today? Maybe like 5 years, even more than 5 years later, where are we with this narrative?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So, when we do a hope-based workshop, we always start with an exercise about perspective. So we ask people, do you think the world's getting better, or is the world getting worse? And so the thing I realize is that it's always a matter of perspective. There's always things to be afraid of. And we as human beings have a very strong negativity bias. So, and recency bias. So, if there's a big conflict in the world right now, obviously that's top of our mind and that gets our attention.
Right.
And so, okay, we think, wow, things have never been this bad. but they've also been bad things in the past. And the danger with always looking at what's going wrong is that there might be things that are actually working. There might be a country that's actually making progress, maybe getting more democratic, more equality. We might miss that because we're so focused on what's going wrong.
What's going wrong?
And
Right.
what's important is the things that are going right, the pineapples, show us how we can get more pineapples.
Yeah.
And so if we're only ever focused on things going wrong, it actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes our reference point. So for example, there's a narrative now, democracy is failing and populism and authoritarianism is on the rise.
I've heard that quite often these days.
So, but actually, I don't think that's actually true. Obviously, there's issues in democracies, but the fact that we can talk about those democracies is actually part of democracy's strength. And so someone at some point has to come along and say why democracy is good, why it's strong. Otherwise, why would people support it? Why would people make an effort to defend it? So that's very important. So the point is actually there are amazing progress that we're making right now. Like if you look at the world today compared to 20, 30 years ago, if you look at how connected we are as a species, as human beings, if you look at LGBT rights, women's rights, measures that have been made on climate compared to 20, 30 years ago, we are getting things done. And what's really important there is people are getting things done. Greta Thunberg is here in Armenia to talk about the COP that's about to happen in Azerbaijan.
Actually, as there's a protest happening as we speak now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's another sign of progress that young people are being heard.
Yeah, and I think also words and visuals matter. So the words we use, and I've heard this quite often, what you just said about democracy. I think it's also the narrative of those authoritarian regimes that want to discredit democracy, even to those who believe in democracy. So it's an easy way. It's like a scapegoat. See, the world's going bad because you chose democracy, whereas we know that that's not the case. But repetition, we talked about this. The more we hear this narrative, the more we start to believing in that narrative. So to counter that, I'm thinking that we need to talk about the kindness and show the pineapples and make trendy what is kind, what is good, and make that the go-to communication. So words and visuals matter. And I think I'd like to ask you about how do you think people feel in terms of seeing images of war, anger, protests constantly? Are they becoming desensitized, or is that still working? Is that something we should continue doing, or do you have another idea around this?
Yeah, so I think what's really important to say is that obviously we need to see those images when they're happening. People need to know what's happening. But I think the danger is if all we see are the images of war, poverty, suffering, it starts to become a reference point for us, which means we think, well, it's just normal that these things will always happen in the world. There's going to be war. It's human nature to fight. You might have a narrative like it's survival of the fittest. And that makes us more prone to then accept these things when they happen again. And so
and not take action to prevent them more.
Yeah. So the point is when we see a problem, we still talk about the problem, but we have to put the problem in the context of an alternative and how things could be instead. Yeah, there's war, but we also know we can have peace. And what is the story we have to tell is, here's how we can end war. So when you have a conflict between two groups, we have to ask ourselves, well, what do we want instead? And eventually, at the end of every conflict, two peoples have to learn to live together again. For example, one side has to ask accountability and forgiveness for what they've done wrong, and the other side has to forgive them, and they have to live together. And so that's really hard. Like, how do you talk about that in the midst of conflict? But it's the only way out. It's the only way forward. So that's why sometimes it's easy to focus on the problem, because it's just very easy. Here's a problem. Solutions are really messy, right? And pineapples are messy. You got to cut them open, all that mess, right? So what we have to do is that hard work of asking ourselves, what is it we want? So put that next to the problem, and then how do we actually get there? But I think it's really, really important, you know, when we have those stories when we're in a war, for example, or situations like that, but to remind ourselves, we've been here before. Maybe not in a specific situation, but other people have faced this situation before. They have come through it. And so that means it's possible for us to also come through it.
Yeah. I think I think we were having this conversation with another colleague of ours about how humans have overcome a lot of different challenges, global challenges, different evolutions or even revolutions. Maybe we're at that junction where we are in a transformation, and I think, you know, we call it digital transformation, but it's not only digital, you know, with this whole AI craze, you know, unexpectedness and uncertainty. And so this is a very important time for us. And I think it's important also to talk about the narratives that you mentioned, right? So the stories that we see and the images that we see of war and despair are so abundant that to create a balance, we need to create more of these hope and kind and good, better future narratives and images. And to do that, like you said, it needs to get messy. It does need to get a little messy and say the things that are not popular.
Yeah, and I think anyone who is going to bring about real change in the world is going to have to introduce ideas, concepts, stories, narratives that are unfamiliar and therefore will be unpopular, because things get popular once people are used to them.
That's right.
So real change makers are people who say things that might at first seem a little naive or crazy. And I'm just, as you were talking about, you know, transformation, the key thing is the transformation starts with someone imagining it. No transformation happens without someone first imagining it.
True.
And so, yeah, you know, my crazy wild vision is that we become more united as human race, maybe even as Earthlings, not just humans, but all living beings on this planet. And that's something that, to me, that's what human rights work is actually about. But it sounds like a crazy thing to say. You can't imagine a politician saying that today. But like, how else are we going to respond to climate change or end war,
right,
if we don't unite as a human race? And so someone has to start saying these things so that they start to become common sense.
Yeah, a lot of the politicians, the names that we remember, like Nelson Mandela, he said things that were not popular at the time, and you know, decades later, he's a hero. He's a name that goes down in history as someone, as a change maker. And I think even now, someone like Greta, you mentioned her, she says things that are not popular. She calls out situations and people and institutions that are harming the climate, but you know, the masses don't really want to get into that, because it's difficult to talk about that, and it's difficult to take the actions needed to make those solutions happen. And I think that's where we as humans sort of try to take the easy way out. And well, we have energy now, we're good. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but we have the energy now. So, you know, let's not rock the boat. So having, yeah.
You know, there's a key thing on what you just said, taking the easy way out, which is basically nudge theory or like behavioral theory, which in so many walks of life, like business and government public policy, is how do you change human behavior? You do it by making the behavior you want people to take easy. And a lot of the time, people say in social change or in activism, we don't look at that. We act as if doing the right thing has to be hard.
Yeah,
but it doesn't. So things that are worth doing are too important not to. So peace, people caring for each other, those things are too important for us not to take all the science that we can and apply it to. So the trick is, how do we make it easy using this behavioral theory? And the way we do it is, you can't just say we have to completely change our society to make it more green. But what Greta Thunberg also does is, you know what? I'm not going to fly. I'm going to take a boat to the UN in New York. And she shows people doing it. And the way things change, the way humans learn behavior is by seeing someone else do it and making it into small steps. And then that's how a change happens.
So we're talking about change and shifts. Yeah, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about the 5 shifts that you tell through your hope-based communications. I guess the audience who don't know what the approach is all about, maybe these 5 shifts will help make them understand better your approach.
The idea of hope-based communication is, we don't want to just tell a hopeful story for the sake of it. It's about finding the hope in every story. And that means that anyone can use this to find the hope in their story. And the way that works is anyone can just ask themselves questions based on these 5 shifts. So they're fear to hope, problem solution, what you're against, what you're for, threat to opportunity, and victim to human. And the idea is that rather than me, a communications expert, telling someone else what to say, they ask themselves these questions. So I'm really clear what the problem is, but have I actually told people the
solution? Yeah.
I'm telling someone what I don't like, what they're doing, but like if they're going to actually act differently, I have to say what that's going to be. A lot of times you just tell someone what's wrong. A lot of this thinking comes from Anat Osorio, a communications expert in the US, and she always says, if you see a lifeguard at a swimming pool, the lifeguard doesn't shout at a child that's running, don't run, they say walk. And this actually, again, we talked about behavioral therapy.
Right.
We want people to change. We actually have to tell them what they should be doing instead.
And telling them, but also showing them. I think the Greta example was quite on point. So thank you for that. I think I also want to talk about, you touched upon it earlier, just a little bit. Isn't being hope-driven somewhat naive? It's like an emotion that you feel. And what about the skepticism that is all around this hope thinking, or yeah? So tell us a little bit about the skepticism you faced and how you deal with that. Because I think a lot of the listeners right now are also perhaps asking questions in their heads, as I did the first time I heard about this.
Yeah, great question. So really important thing to know about hope is actually goal-directed thinking. It's more of a cognitive function, actually. It's a way of thinking based on what is my goal, how do I achieve that goal, and actually believing I'm capable of actually walking that pathway to making this goal happen. And what makes it a lot different to, say, optimism or positivity is it's not actually about how likely it is I'm going to achieve that goal. It's whether the goal is actually worth pursuing. And then I act differently in order to achieve it. And I think that's really important. So the funny thing for me is actually, it's normal to react. We live in this culture where negativity is seen as intelligent. There's this theory called cynical genius illusion, where if someone says something critical, they're going to sound more intelligent, even if what they're saying is completely nonsense. Whereas someone coming forward with solutions in a sort of hopeful way, as in this is possible, tends to actually be less respected. And so basically, being hopeful, sharing your innermost hopes, your visions for the future, how you'd like people to behave, is actually requires being quite vulnerable.
I was just thinking that.
People are going to laugh at you and make fun of you. And let's look at one of the key things you mentioned, repetition. You know, part of actually having people repeating something is actually embracing maybe some of that ridicule. I think it was Gandhi first said, first they laugh at you, then they attack you, then they join you. So it's also part of the process. And that's actually when I talk about hope-based communication to people, I'll tell them, like you know, I'm a very skeptical person myself. And it's the people who actually ask those hard questions at first tend to be the ones who later believe in it, precisely because
they are asking the question.
For sure. But so the real naivety actually is believing that we can make change happen without saying what that change is. So actually, if you think about it, just saying there's a problem and assuming that's enough to actually bring about a solution, actually, that's the naivety, that we can have change without actually showing people what that change is. The
solution, like. Yeah, and the solution requires also actions. The solution requires, I think, collective action, because I do recycle, but is that enough? Yeah. I do try and reduce my carbon footprint. Is that enough? I am showing to my immediate network the way I live. Maybe I influence or inspire some people to do it, but I think a collective, a wider collective change is required for any real big change to be seen or at least perceived that the change is actually happening. Because sometimes change happens and we don't see it. I mean, it happens throughout the years, and then you do a quick look back and say, that's how it was, and now it's like this. And speaking of recycling, this is exactly how it was in Montreal where I was living. So we started really with like the skeptic approach where, you know, some people were recycling, and today is just second nature. Recycle, people understand it. The whole generation knows what recycling is all about, how it works. I wanted us to go into this collective change and how you as a communicator or someone who's leading this hope-based communications concept, I guess throughout the world, because I've seen you jump from here to there and try and build different communities. So what are you trying to achieve in the collective sense of things? Because the idea for me is it resonates beautifully, and I want to replicate it in my own work and my own community. But I'm thinking, well, where else in the world is this happening? And how can I connect with these people? And, you know, just tell me a little bit about your vision of how you're going to help me connect with other people that feel and think like you and I.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Rafi. That's really good, really important point. So what we want to do is build a global community of people who are using this hope-based approach. The way we think about it is we're on a mission to organize hope. You know, you look around the world today, you see authoritarians and populists trying to divide us, and they're using incredibly sophisticated tools, you know, to spread stories that make us afraid of each other, literally like with bots that create fights online. They want fear, they want division. And so in a way, when I look around and see this sense that, oh, there's no compassion or empathy in the world, no wonder, look how much is being invested to destroy it. The question is, what would happen if we invest just a fraction of that resource in cultivating the kindness, the compassion, the empathy that's just inherent in all of us? And so the big dream vision is actually, can we make compassion common sense in the world? Can we promote globally narratives along the lines of what I call a shared humanity narrative, that actually we're all human beings, we have more in common than divides us. And but above all, that human nature is actually fundamentally kind, which I think is an underpinning that the more we think that, the more likely we are to actually be kind ourselves. And the way we do that is actually quite simple. It's by telling stories. The stories we see today are the action we take tomorrow. And so what we have to fix, what we have to counter these really powerful forces trying to divide us, is by organizing ourselves to actually work together to tell those stories. And so I think what really needs to be done differently is we can't do that old school communication anymore, where we send a press release to a newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
We actually have an amazing opportunity. You know, it's a threat seeing AI and this new technology. And again, a populist can make loads of different advertisements turning group one against group two.
Right.
But someone has to actually build the compassion, the humanity, the empathy through stories as well. But the storytelling power no longer belongs to a big newspaper. It belongs to an influencer who can tell a really good story, usually on a video, usually visually. And so what would happen if we start training influencers who can tell the human story and then work together to share and elevate those stories? So I would consider that collective storytelling. That's the big dream.
Are you on that path? Are you helping or training influencers, or have you reached that point where you're helping them tell those stories?
You know, so that's one of my coffee spills. I think actually, you know what, my big coffee spill, which I think is the same coffee spill for a lot of people who want to change the world, is being too hard on myself. And so I have this pressure on myself because my family are genocide survivors. I feel I have to do everything. I have to change the world. If I'm not changing the world, then I'm failing, and I'm failing their memory. And so what I've wanted to do is like run these campaigns myself and build all these campaigns that's going to create this compassion and empathy. But what I've realized is the power of this hope-based approach by accident is actually not me fixing things, but everyone together having that same mindset. And so the goal to reach this big dream I talked about is actually more of a longer journey, because what I believe is it's not just me deciding that's the story. We all have to work together. And so my focus is actually not just training people to think this way, but training people like yourself to train other people to think this way. And so I think
a good point. Yeah.
The path is actually that we have more, you know, I'm really, maybe people can help me with this. I keep thinking of it as a hope army, but I hate the word army. And so we're constantly trying to brainstorm.
Community is good,
Community
maybe.
is good,
But
doesn't
I
say
know,
what we're
yes,
doing.
yeah. It's
So
not
I'm
the
thinking it's like dandelions, it's like bees, because we have to spread things together. But the point is that we have to like organize globally to strategically work together to share those stories. But the way to do it, on the other side have money, we've got people.
yeah.
And so what I think I need to do actually, my coffee spill is to think, oh, I need to get the money too and build a campaign. Actually, the pineapple that's been sitting there the whole time that I've missed is just actually having a simple training tool that I can share with with people around the world like you and people in other countries. And together we can spread this and build that wider community to do things.
So yes or no question. Is there a book coming?
Oh, in German we have there's a word that combines yes and no.
Maybe.
There's a book half written.
Uh-huh.
But one of the things I think about, so yeah, my biggest coffee spill of all is I always tell people now, you shouldn't be trying to raise awareness, because just telling someone something's wrong, I ask people, once their awareness is raised, what do you want them to do afterwards? And actually then your story should just show the new thing you want people to do. You want people to welcome refugees. Don't just tell them there's people suffering in refugee camps. Show them, look at your neighbor who also welcomed a refugee. So, but I realized I've been also raising awareness about hope-based communication and all this brain science. And so a book is really a lot of raising awareness. Like there's so much neuroscience, there's so much insight about how humans work in fields of life like sports science are just completely not present in politics and economics, the fields that are trying to make humans treat each other better. And so I desperately want all my colleagues in this social change field to know all of this brain science. So that's the kind of book approach is know this. And so I've been rethinking a little bit and thinking, instead of thinking, okay, how am I going to get people to read the same book I read? I want to take the insights from that brain science and turn it into practice. So essentially exercises, tools that people can use to build their hope muscle. So I'm actually thinking more maybe of like a workbook is my current plan, full of exercises, and we'll get together.
I can see that.
We're going to launch an online community, which you'll join hopefully. And every 2 weeks,
to.
we'll all get together and we'll do an exercise. And then obviously you can read the science around it ahead of time. But so the key thing is doing rather than just talking.
Yeah, I love when you say these exercises will keep our hope muscle alive and workable and engaged with ongoing challenges, because I see new challenges coming in the coming years and decades. There always will be. And the point is, what do we do tomorrow? I mean, when we talk about hope, this is what I always tell my colleagues is, well, tomorrow is another day, right? So if we don't think of it that way, so how are we going to do this tomorrow? Like today we messed up. So how are we going to do it tomorrow not to mess up? And once you start thinking of it that way, in terms of conflicts, wars, cross-border, I don't know, climate, gender issues, LGBTQI, all these issues start making sense. How will we do this better tomorrow? So I usually ask, what's your coffee spill and what's your pineapple? But you beat me to it, and you already gave me these anecdotes. Can we close it off with maybe a story of a personal story, maybe of yours that you can share with all of us, and how your hope-based communication actually led to certain action where change happened, and you actually saw in the long term or even a short term, depending on what the story is, that change. You saw it happen and you said, okay, this is working.
Yeah, so I come from Ireland, which is a country that when I was born was really very socially conservative and quite repressive, really. Like it was dominated by one religious institution. And when I was born in it, you couldn't get divorced, you couldn't get an abortion, you certainly couldn't even buy contraception, literally, was legal. And certainly couldn't marry someone of the same sex as yourself. And even like when we were working at Amnesty International to try and decriminalize abortion, because literally you could go to jail even just having a miscarriage. That was strict laws.
Really?
It was like a woman even died because she didn't get medical treatment she needed. It was very, very bad. And we didn't even believe like we could achieve small change. But actually, I mean, there were other campaigners I learned from them. They had the courage to change the way we have conversations, drawing on an approach called decanvassing, which is instead of telling people they're wrong and like you have to give up your religious identity and change your mind, you're wrong, we'd actually have conversations with them. And they changed the conversation to make it about the right to life versus the right to choose, which is quite like you're one side or the other. They made it about compassion, care, and change. And so I remember the day of the referendum on decriminalizing abortion, a friend of mine who said his whole life we had argued, in the pub over a beer. And I would say,
as the Irish
yes,
men
as
would
Irish
do.
yeah. And then he would say, it's just wrong, and I would come back with some argument and we would argue, but I would never actually move him, no matter how clever my argument was. I saw him post to Facebook saying, I'm still a strong practicing Catholic. I still don't actually believe abortion is right, but I also have heard the stories now. And I care about the women in my life and I want them to be taken care of if something happens to them. And so I'm voting to decriminalize this, and I urge all my friends to as well.
Beautiful.
So you can just see the change happening, not by telling people, but by using a different set of values that people can come together around. And that was very powerful for me to see this change happen in Ireland. And so a lot of people today will see Ireland and say, oh, but of course, Ireland's in Western Europe. Of course, it's LGBT rights. But this literally happened within 5 or 6 years of campaigning. And I think what the really important lesson there is for all of us is that human beings can change. If we learn anything from brain science, it's that our brains are constantly adapting to the circumstances. And so any situation that we don't like today, we don't have to accept that. Even if it's hard work and takes a long time, human beings can change. That's what's wonderful about us. And so we can make changes. We can make very, very radical, ambitious change happen.
Well, on that note, thank you for the story. I think I'll remember it, and maybe I will tell it as a gossip, a positive gossip.
In the pub over a beer.
In the pub over a beer.
Or coffee and some pineapple.
Without spilling the coffee.
Definitely a lot of beer got spilled.
Yeah, I could imagine after certain hours, right? So thank you very much for this conversation, really stimulating, inspiring, and I hope our listeners leave with some notion of how to think about what they're doing and how they're doing it, ask themselves the questions that they need to ask, and then read up about hope-based communication and see how they can use it in their work. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for listening.